Hey there, everybody. Welcome back, and thanks so much for hanging out with me today. I've got a fresh story to spill, so let's dive right in. I'm Matthew, and for the past decade, I was pretty darn sure I had a rock-solid marriage. I make my living as a trucker, one of those folks steering massive rigs down highways, lugging everything from groceries to couches across the country. It's a grind, no doubt about it, but it keeps the lights on. For years, I figured I was out there clocking miles for all the right reasons. My wife, Aurora, and I had carved out a life together, a real partnership, or so I thought. I was head over heels for her, and I was convinced she felt the same about me. Right from the get-go, we decided kids weren't part of our plan. Neither of us had that itch, and we were totally cool with keeping it just the two of us. We had our own groove, our own way of rolling through life. I'd put in crazy long hours on the road, while Aurora kept things running smooth back home. That was our deal. I'll be real with you, trucking's no picnic. You're always moving, wrestling with late nights, wild schedules, and barely a moment to breathe before the next haul calls your name. I'd map out a weekend to crash at home, but then some last-second delivery would pop up, shoving my plans back a couple of days. That's just how it went. Still, no matter how wiped out I felt, I'd hustle back home whenever I could swing it. To me, marriage wasn't just about stacking cash and covering bills. It was about showing up, being there, even when my tank was running on empty. I wanted to be with Aurora, plain and simple. That's what I thought a marriage should look like, and for a good stretch, I figured she saw it the same way. Turns out, I was way off base. I can still pinpoint the moment I noticed something had shifted between us. Aurora and I had been hitched for 8 years by then, and for most of that time, things felt pretty steady. We weren't the type to set the world on fire with romance, but we had our flow. After a long haul, I'd roll in, and she'd be there with a hug, a quick kiss, and at least a little spark of happiness that I'd made it back. It was something I could count on. But then, out of nowhere, that spark started to flicker. Here's where things started getting real for me. The first clue I picked up was how Aurora quit sparking anything close between us. Back in the day, she'd toss out flirty comments, crack little jokes, or just snuggle up next to me while we zoned out to the TV. But then, all that vanished. At first, I chalked it up to her being worn out or maybe stressed. Life can hit you hard, you know? But it wasn't just a rough patch or a fleeting slump. It settled in as the new normal. If I didn't take the lead, nothing happened at all. And even when I did step up, it felt like she was just playing along, like she was checking a box, not because she actually wanted to be in the moment with me. Then there were the texts, or lack of them. When I was out on the road, we used to keep a steady chatter going. Just small stuff, like her asking how my haul was treating me. But all of a sudden, her replies shrank down to almost nothing. I'd shoot her a message, and it'd be hours before I'd hear back, if I even got a ping at all. When she finally did respond, it'd be a quick, okay, or yeah, no extras, no questions about how I was holding up. It was like she was drifting away, bit by bit. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that's just what happens when you've been together a while. People get cozy, right? But as time rolled on, I couldn't dodge the truth. Our whole connection had turned lopsided. I was the one always reaching out, tossing out ideas to keep us tight, trying to hold it all together. If I didn't kick off a chat, we'd sit in silence. If I didn't nudge us to hang out, we'd just float around the house like a couple of strangers sharing an address, not a married pair. I kept clinging to this hope that things would snap back to how they used to be, but months stretched into years, and the gap between us only widened. It stung to realize I felt lonelier in my own marriage than I ever did out there on those endless highways. One night, I was totally beat after a brutal stretch on the road. Trucking's not just work, it's a whole way of life. Some days, I'd think I'd roll into the driveway by supper, but then a last-minute gig would drop, dangling just enough cash to make me say, sure, why not? That's exactly what went down this time. I'd figured I'd be home in a day, but 3 days stretched to 4. By the time I finally pulled up, all I could think about was a hot shower, some grub, and crashing hard for a solid night's sleep. I didn't even think to shoot Aurora a text letting her know I was on my way home. She'd gotten used to my wild, unpredictable trucking hours by then. As I stepped through the front door, the house felt eerily still, except for this soft murmur drifting in from the back porch. Aurora was out there, chatting on the phone. Could have been her sister or a buddy, I figured. I kicked off my dusty boots and shuffled into the kitchen, snagging a glass from the shelf and filling it up with cold water. I was so zoned in on soothing my parched throat that her words didn't even hit me at first. But as I wandered toward the bedroom, Just a few steps from the porch, her voice started cutting through the haze. I can't stand him anymore. I don't even get why I'm still sticking around. I froze mid-stride, my brain tripping over itself to process what I just heard. Was she talking about me? Nah, that couldn't be right, or could it? Then came a heavy sigh from her, a little break in the conversation. Whoever was on the other end mumbled something I couldn't catch, and Aurora's voice piped up again, sharp and clear as a bell. He's just too convenient. Dumping him would take way too much effort. I haven't been in love with him for years. I can't even put into words the gut punch that hit me right then. For over 12 years, I've been dead certain I had a real teammate, someone who cared about me, even if our life wasn't picture perfect. I'd given up sleep, downtime, and any shred of comfort, hauling loads across the country to keep us afloat. And yet, in her own voice, I was nothing but a chore, a handy paycheck she couldn't stand to be around. I stumbled into the bedroom and plopped down on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor like it might give me answers. My hands just sat there on my knees, but my mind was a million miles away. Had she been putting on an act this whole time? My thoughts started racing, flipping through every memory of our years together, hunting for the exact second it all went sideways. Was I too clueless to see it? Or was she just a master at playing the part? The deeper I dug, the more it sank in. I didn't even know the woman I'd called my wife. I stayed perched there, lost in that daze, no clue how long I lingered. Could have been a handful of minutes, could have been hours. Time didn't even register anymore. Then, out of nowhere, the bedroom door creaked open. Aurora stepped inside, and the second her eyes landed on me, they went wide with shock. But just as quick, she plastered on this fake, breezy look, like she hadn't just ripped my world apart. All right, so here's how it went down from there. Oh, I didn't hear you sneak in, Aurora said, her voice casual but shaky. Maybe she wasn't sure how much I'd caught, but she definitely knew I'd overheard something. I didn't open my mouth, just gave a little nod. Honestly, I didn't trust myself to talk. Anything I said would have either tumbled out all cracked and shaky or roared out in pure anger. I could feel her eyes on me as she lingered there, looking like she might add something else. But I didn't give her the chance. Without even glancing her way, I hauled myself off the bed and muttered something about needing a shower. I didn't stick around for her to reply, just marched straight to the bathroom, locked the door tight, and cranked the water on. Standing there under the steaming spray, I let it hammer against me, hoping it'd melt away the knot choking my chest. Spoiler, it didn't. I lost track of time in there. Could have been 15 minutes, could have been a full hour, but when I finally climbed out, I didn't head back to the bedroom. No way was I up for her awkward chit-chat or, worse, that heavy silence of hers. Instead, I shuffled into the living room, flicked on the TV, and plopped down on the couch. I stared at the flickering screen, but my brain wasn't registering a single thing playing. Usually, when I rolled in from a haul, I'd have a couple of goofy stories up my sleeve, some oddball thing I saw at a truck stop or a laugh from the road. I always had something to share. But that night? Zilch. And Aurora? She didn't even bother asking. By the time I dragged myself to bed, she was already out cold. I flopped down and spent the whole night with my eyes glued to the ceiling, wrestling with the same question. If this was how she really felt, then what was I even doing here? As the first faint glow of morning slipped through the window, it hit me. I was done. I made up my mind right then to just go. I slid out of bed quiet as a shadow, drifting through the house like I didn't belong there anymore. I grabbed a handful of stuff that actually meant something to me, just the essentials. All the rest? Didn't care. I wasn't about to lug around anything that tied me to this life any longer. I didn't bother scribbling a note. When I stepped outside into that crisp early air, I had no clue what was waiting for me down the road, and you know what? I didn't give a darn. All I knew was that whatever came next had to beat sticking around with someone who only kept me around because it was easier than kicking me out. Aurora wanted a cushy, no-effort life? Well, now she'd have it, free and clear. Hey y'all, here's how it unfolded after I walked out. I figured Aurora wouldn't catch on to anything strange right off the bat. My trucking gig had always kept me on an erratic schedule. I could head out for what I thought was a quick day trip and end up gone a whole week if delays or surprise deliveries piled up. She'd grown used to that chaos. Normally, if I slipped out while she was still snoozing, I'd shoot her a text come morning or give her a ring later to touch base. But this time, no point. Before I peeled out of town, I swung by the bank and pulled out as much cash as I could without setting off any red flags. Then I grabbed my phone, popped out the SIM card, and broke it clean in two. That tiny chunk of plastic was the last thread tying her to me. Now it was history. No more calls, no more messages, no need to explain a thing. I knew she'd try hunting me down eventually, but good luck with that. Truckers aren't your typical 9-to-6 desk jockeys. We don't plant roots anywhere, and the folks I rolled with were just as tough to track. If she started asking questions, no one would have a solid answer. Maybe I'd headed up Midwest, maybe I'd jumped to a new company, or maybe I was still out there cruising some random highway. She'd hit a wall every time. With my phone trashed and my bridges burned, I hit the gas and let the road stretch out in front of me. No plan, no endpoint, just miles between me and what I'd left behind. I wound up in this little Oklahoma town where folks keep to themselves and don't pry into your business. It was exactly what I needed. Nobody knew my name. Nobody cared where I'd come from. I was just some guy hitting the reset button. Over the next few months, I kept waiting for a wave of regret, or maybe a pinch of guilt to sneak up on me for ditching my marriage like that. But as days bled into weeks and weeks rolled into months, it never came. I didn't miss Aurora one bit. I started to see that the quiet around me wasn't emptiness. It was calm, pure, and simple. I picked up some random gigs here and there, not out of necessity, but just because I felt like it. Some days, I'd tinker at a local auto shop, wrenching on trucks like the ones I used to pilot across the country. Other times, I'd mow lawns or trim hedges for older folks who'd send me home with a plate of home-cooked goodness instead of a paycheck. It wasn't about the cash. I had enough tucked away to scrape by. It was about doing stuff on my terms, stuff that didn't feel like a burden or a box I had to check. For the first time in forever, I was calling the shots for me. Hey folks, let's keep this rolling. Out here, I wasn't busting my tail just to keep someone else cozy. I was finally living life my way. Back in my old world, the only folks I really swapped words with were other truckers at gas stations or whatever quick chats Aurora could stomach. But in this new place, I actually found real buddies. These were guys who didn't dig into where I'd been or what I'd left behind unless I felt like spilling it myself. After a day's work, we'd kick back with some cheap brews, shooting the breeze about everyday stuff, life, jobs, or where to snag the juiciest burger in town. It was basic, sure, but it hit me how much I'd been craving that kind of simple connection without even knowing it. The best part? No strings, no pressure. Nobody was tapping their foot for me to check in or counting down the minutes till I rolled back home. If I felt like hitting the road for a bit, I'd grab my keys and go. If I wanted to snooze till noon, I'd pull the covers up and sleep. Every little choice I made was mine, because I wanted it, not because I was roped into it. That kind of freedom? I'd never tasted anything like it before. I figured Aurora was out of my life for good after I vanished for a whole year. I'd built something new, days where I didn't wake up feeling like a weight dragging down my own house. To this day, I still can't figure out how she tracked me down. Did she pester some old trucking pals? Hire somebody to sniff me out? Who knows? But one afternoon, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Out of reflex, I picked up, and the second her voice crackled through, my gut twisted into a knot. Matthew, it's me. I didn't say a peep at first. What was there to even say? She kept going, though, her words wobbly like she'd practiced this speech 100 times in her head. She swore she didn't mean what she'd said that night, that it was just hot air, a vent from being fed up and not knowing how to let it out. She even had the guts to claim she still loved me. But I'd spent 12 months turning those words of hers over in my mind, and I knew what was real. That wasn't just frustration slipping out. She'd laid her truth bare, never dreaming I'd catch it. At first, I didn't bite. I blocked her number right then and there, no words needed. But she wouldn't let up. She started firing off texts from random numbers, long, weepy messages packed with sorries, promises, and what-ifs. She'd ramble on about how hollow the house felt without me, how she couldn't catch a wink of sleep, how she'd messed up big time and knew it now. Aurora even tried laying a guilt trip on me, saying I'd crushed her by walking out, that I should have let her clear the air, that we could patch things up. But there was nothing left to stitch together. I saw right through her frantic pleas. She wasn't torn up over what she'd said. She was just reeling from the fallout. She'd banked on me always sticking around, no matter how little she bothered to invest in us. When I finally bailed, it wasn't love driving her to chase me down. It was the panic of watching her safety net unravel. After a while, I tossed her a bone, a reply, but not the one she was fishing for. I'll come back, I said, cool as could be, but not for you. I'm coming to wrap up this marriage for good. Dead quiet on her end. No texts, no calls, nothing. For once, she was out of words, and honestly, I didn't give a rip. Looking back, I never pictured myself as the guy who'd just vanish. That wasn't my grand scheme when I left. I wasn't aiming to erase myself forever. I just wanted her to feel the sting of losing someone. To wake up one morning and see I wasn't some handy prop she could ignore until it went missing. But the longer I stayed gone, the clearer it got. I didn't miss her, not even a smidge. And if she wasn't tugging at my heart, why would I ever circle back? Now I can spot all those clues that were staring me in the face. The way she quit texting me when I was hauling loads. The way she'd only get close if I made the first move. I spent years convincing myself it was just a bump in the road, something every couple weathers. But the real deal? I was just a convenience to her. I kept the bills paid, kept her world steady, but the love? That had fizzled out ages ago, and I was too stubborn or too dreamy to admit it. If this whole mess taught me anything, it's this: convenience ain't love. Being put up with isn't the same as being treasured. If someone's only hanging around because ditching you is too much hassle, they're not your teammate. They're just a roommate with better perks. And if you ever find yourself begging for a scrap of effort, you're already on the losing end. Here's another nugget. If someone doesn't see your worth, don't waste your breath debating it. Just walk. No yelling, no big speeches, just go. If they really cared, you wouldn't have to claw for their time in the first place. Trust me, once you step away for good, you'll feel this wave of peace you didn't even know you'd been missing. The biggest takeaway? Don't sleep on the red flags. If you feel unwanted, odds are you are. If you're stuck wondering if they still care, deep down, you've already got your answer. I saw those signs for years and brushed them off, clinging to the Aurora I fell for way back when. But that girl was long gone, and I had to face the truth, even if it knocked the wind out of me. So, now I'm tossing it to you. What would you have done if you were me? Would you have stuck around and hashed it out with her? Given her one more shot to make it right? Or would you have hit the road like I did? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. And if this story struck a chord with you, give it a like, share it around, and hit that subscribe button. Someone out there might need to hear this just as much as I needed to live it. If you like this story, be sure to subscribe. Wishing you a fantastic day full of positivity.